We are so glad you are tuning in to an LOPC sermon. This message is an excerpt from one of our worship services, which contains other elements such as songs and prayer. We hope that you hear a word from God today.
Out of college was a man from India. And for this kid from the Midwest, I had never seen a man in a turban before I interviewed with him. He had a strong foreign accent and was from a place I knew hardly anything about. But we hit it off, and we have remained very close friends to this day, even though we ended up working together for only 4 months. He and his wife have become like an aunt and uncle to our daughters. And over the years, he urged David and I to consider taking a trip to India, and he said he would meet us there. So in 2013, that's exactly what we did. And this is one of my favorite pictures from that trip. Meg had just received a spa treatment, and my nose just wanted to smudge itself into her cheek to take in all the great Indian aromas. The staff at our hotel, since we were there over the holidays, sang Christmas carols to us. And this was kind of like when our daughter performed in 4th grade, along with the band in elementary school, Handel's Messiah. We recognized it, but barely, with the Indian intonations and chords and rhythm. On New Year's Eve, we found ourselves in Varanasi, which is the holiest city for Hindus. It's on the bank of the Ganges River, and the Hindus believe that if you die in Varanasi and are cremated there and your ashes are put in the Ganges River, that you will escape the cycle of birth and rebirth and will go directly to heaven. So as part of our itinerary that night, we were going to observe an arti ceremony, which is a devotional offering of light to the Hindu deities. And then we were going to board a boat to float down the Ganges and observe cremations happening along the banks or the ghats along the river. This was not my idea of a great New Year's Eve party. I was apprehensive, I was queasy, I was very anxious, and I almost was getting sick to my stomach thinking that I was going to be assaulted by the smell of burning flesh. And as our boat floated past one of the cremation sites, our guide gave us a bowl of leaves with a candle and some marigolds in it, and he invited us to say a prayer or a devotion, whatever might have been natural for us, and then to set it in the Ganges River. So I did that, and totally unexpectedly, I felt like I was immediately surrounded by every single person in my life who had ever loved me and had died. My mom, my grandparents, my great aunt, in whose lap I had learned to tie my shoes. And it was such a profound experience for me that I couldn't even talk to David about it that night. But over breakfast the next morning, I shared with him what had happened. And you know what his response was? The same thing had happened to him. Now, I have no way to cognitively explain what happened that evening, but it is one of my most precious travel memories. In that moment, I had found love in all the wrong places. Now, my mother's name was Ruth, and so in her memory today, we're going to be looking at the book of Ruth in the Hebrew Scriptures. I also picked this passage because I thought we ought to follow a woman on a journey sometime this summer as well. Now, I took a class from a professor named Rob Johnson at Fuller Seminary called Theology and Film. And one of the things he always said to us was that if you can't watch the first 5 minutes of a film, then you shouldn't watch it at all, because those first 5 minutes set up everything that is to follow. The same could be said about the opening paragraph of the book of Ruth. And our text today is a bit longer than usual, and so I'm going to walk us through it with some color commentary along the way, especially focusing on this first paragraph and all of the meaning that resides underneath its surface in this opening scene. So hear now the word of God. In the days when the judges ruled, so this means this was the time before the Israelites began their tumultuous, and some might say their failed experiment with kings, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem, which means house of bread, in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, which means my God is king. And the name of his wife, Naomi, which means pleasant. So this is a rather auspicious beginning. Out of the house of bread comes my God is king and pleasantness. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon, which means sickness or disease, and Chilion, which means frail or wasting away. We aren't even in verse 2 yet completely. And we already have a plot that's thickening with foreshadowing. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. Now Moab was the country to the east of Judah on the other side of the Dead Sea. To the Israelites, those in Judah, it would have been a very foreign land indeed. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives, which would have been totally frowned upon by the people back home. The name of one was Orpah, which means back of the neck. I'll get to that one later. And the name of the other was Ruth, which derives from the Hebrew word for companion or friend. Now, we aren't even told which woman married which son. And when they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. That's a lot to take in 10 years. She has moved from Bethlehem to Moab. Her husband has died, as well as her 2 sons. And in the text, when it says Naomi was left without her 2 sons, the word for left is actually the Hebrew word which means the meal offering, or what is left over after the meal offering or a sacrifice has been burned. It references the ash or the husk that is left behind. That's what grief feels like. Like all we have left is ash and husk. Now, we kind of have a parallel in the English language, because if you think about it, we have a word for a woman who has lost a husband, which is a widow. We have a word for a child who has lost their parents, an orphan, but nowhere in our English language do we have a word for a woman who has lost her children. See, even in our English language, we reflect the unspeakable tragedies that Naomi has experienced. So she was left over. She was the ash or the husk in a foreign land with these foreign daughter-in-laws, and she was even unable to provide for her family because land, if they had any, is only owned by men in this patriarchal society. And 10 years of marriage to Mahlon and Chilion had not produced an heir to carry on the family legacy. So Naomi, Orpah, and Ruth are 3 childless women with no social capital and extremely vulnerable to being attacked, exploited, or even to sexual violence. To say that Naomi had hit rock bottom is an understatement indeed. And so we pick up. Then Naomi started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people and given them food. So they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. Now, as they started with nothing but the crunch of gravel under their feet, perhaps Naomi started ruminating on her life, because that's what grief often does to us. She may have remembered all of the really good things that she had experienced, but she was probably more feeling the stabbing pain of all of her loss. It's hard to invite another person into our most vulnerable places and our deepest emotions. So we might imagine Naomi's inner dialogue going something like this. This is all wrong. Orpah and Ruth are reminders of all that I had, and all they do now is remind me of all that I have lost and the reality of my despair. They aren't even my people. What was I thinking, hauling them all the way back to Bethlehem with me? I have nothing to offer them. This is the end of the road for all of us if we continue together. I'm returning to women that I used to know who are probably all bouncing grandbabies on their laps right now. And when they see me returning with 2 Moabite women, they will ostracize me. So what does Ruth do? She turns to Naomi and Ruth and tells them to go back home, to go back to their families of origin. Because sometimes in grief, we actually shut out the people who are closest to us. So she says to them, go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you in the house of your husband. Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud. They said to her, no, we will return with you to your people. But Naomi said, turn back, my daughters. Will you come with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters. Go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. It has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me. Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to Naomi. So Naomi said, look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. Remember, Orpah meant back of the neck? That's what Naomi would have seen as Orpah walked away. But Ruth said, do not press me to leave you, to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord do thus to me, and more as well, if even death departs me from you. Ruth's words to Naomi are beautiful and caring. She is offering her the promise of a covenantal relationship. Ruth is willing to adopt a new land, a new ethnic identity, and a new God. She's willing to give up the chances of her being married or having children herself to accompany Naomi. Now, for the 10 years they lived together, perhaps Ruth saw something of God's loving kindness in Naomi's actions towards her. Or perhaps she saw the truth in Naomi's face. While Naomi had stayed focused on the past, Ruth was focused on the future. She said, I will go. I will lodge. Where you die, I will die. As if to say, but today is not the day we die. Where you are buried, I will be buried. Now, then, as it is now, families were buried together. So it's as if Ruth is saying to Naomi, this now is family. The two of us, we belong together. You are now my chosen family. Ruth offered her presence, and she offered exactly what her name meant, a friend or companion to be with Naomi as she returned to Bethlehem. Now, when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said no more. So the two of them went on until they came to Bethlehem. Now, notice it doesn't say they went along together as if they had suddenly become aligned. No, it's almost as if Naomi is reluctantly acquiescing to allow Ruth to accompany her home. And when they came to Bethlehem, the whole town was stirred because of them. And the women of Bethlehem said, "Is this Naomi?" Naomi's tragedies had made her totally unrecognizable. And Naomi said to them, "Call me no longer Naomi," which meant pleasant. My life is no longer pleasant. Call me Mara, which means bitter. For the Almighty has dealt bitterly with me. I went away full, but the Lord has brought me back empty. So Naomi blamed God for the bitterness in her life. She came back to Jerusalem empty, perhaps lamenting the fact that her own womb had not produced a future generation that could care for her and carry on the family lineage. After this long journey, she was still focused on everything that had been taken away from her. Naomi didn't even acknowledge Ruth's presence there with her. Despite having Ruth at her side the entire journey from Moab back to Bethlehem, Naomi still didn't see the companionship that Ruth offered her. Now, I'll let you read the rest of this book yourself. It's really short, only 4 chapters in total, but here are the cliff notes. Naomi had a relative through Elimelech, a kinsman through Elimelech named Boaz, and he was a leading citizen in Bethlehem. And when they arrived, Naomi sent Ruth out to glean from the fields, meaning she was picking up what was left over after the workers had collected the harvest. The field she was in happened to belong to Boaz, and he noticed Ruth's loving kindness towards Naomi. So through a certain series of events and legal processes, Boaz manages to redeem Elimelech's field and claim it as his own. And then he marries Ruth. Ruth and Boaz have a baby boy who they name Obed. But the women in Bethlehem call Obed Naomi's child, a restorer of life. Imagine that if all of your friends are calling this grandchild Naomi's child, a restorer of life. Now, it just so happens that Obed was King David's grandfather. Think about that for a minute. Naomi had found love in all the wrong places. She had found love in a foreign land, in a foreign daughter-in-law, in her bitterness, in her grief, and in her feelings of bitterness towards God. Those are not places we naturally look for love. But through Ruth, God's loving kindness came to Naomi. God's love often does that. It finds us when life knocks us down and we are feeling most vulnerable, most hurt, and most defenseless. When death and loss seem to be the only reality we know, sometimes it is another human soul, another person who extends loving kindness to help lead us back to life and to hope and to redemption and to God. Now, there are 3 words in the book of Ruth which frame the entire text, and those are turning or returning, redemption, and loving kindness. Naomi could not find her own way back to life in the midst of all the loss that she had experienced. But what this text shows us is that there is nothing in our lives that cannot be redeemed by the love of God. God's love can find us in all. the wrong places. So we have here a microcosm of the entire biblical text. You see, turning or returning is our movement towards God. And redemption is God's movement towards us, to extend God's loving kindness to us. We have probably all heard the phrase to practice random acts of kindness. And that's not what this text is about. Loving kindness is not simply being nice to others in a haphazard way. Loving kindness is extending God's love to others, extending God's mercy, God's loyalty, God's steadfastness, God's care to others. Because we never know when a word we say or an action we take may be the thing that calls someone back to life or back to God. And we never know when someone else's word or action towards us may do the same and pull us back to life and back to God. You see, God's loving kindness depends on our actions and our decisions. I turned to a few female Jewish theologians as I was preparing for today. And in her writing about Ruth and Naomi, Ruth H. Son references the Jewish prayers that are prayed on Rosh Hodesh and other Jewish festivals. It is this: Ana Adonai Hoshiana. Dear God, we beseech you to save us. Ana Adonai Hatzlikana. Dear God, we beseech you to make our own efforts fruitful. That is to say, she writes, we look to you, God, to do what only you can do to bring us to a place of wholeness. We look to you, God, to strengthen and enable us to do what only we can do to bring wholeness and peace to the world. So you see, Ruth's decision to follow Naomi on her journey back home ultimately brought Naomi back to life and wholeness and redemption. Ultimately, it was an elderly widow and a childless Moabite daughter-in-law who preserved the family lineage. And that family lineage started with Abraham, went through Obed, to King David, and all the way to Jesus, who is the Redeemer and the restorer of life for the whole world. So while God is the Redeemer, God also calls us to play a role in bringing redemption and wholeness to this world. So as we look around, I'm sure we can see people who are vulnerable and hurting right outside our sanctuary doors, in our communities, and across the world. And we are called to help in God's redemption of this world. In our words and in our actions, we can help to bring people from famine to harvest, from barrenness to fertility, from loss to fullness, and from life to death, all in the service of God, who is ultimately the Redeemer and extends loving kindness to all of us in all of our wrong places. Amen.
We invite you to get to know our community better. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel, explore our website, or perhaps visit us here on a Sunday morning for worship. We look forward to getting to know you and know that you always have a place here at LOPC.